Hello again, boys and girls, and parents, and grandparents, and all who are watching this video here today. I'm Pastor Mark again, and really glad to be with you and to be able to share some more of one of my favorite Easter storybooks, and to read a couple more chapters and reflect with you a little on them. If you remember, the name of the book is called Peter's First Easter, written by Walter Wangerin Jr. and illustrated by Timothy Ladwig. And if you remember where we're at in the story, we've been following Peter's experiences through the Thursday of Jesus being at the Last Supper with his disciples, and then later they go off to the Mount of Olives where Judas, Jesus' friend, betrays Jesus, and we've seen how Peter then goes to the high priest's courtyard, and there he says 3 times he doesn't even know Jesus, and he's so troubled by that. He just bursts into tears because he's so sad about his saying that he doesn't even know his best friend. And now we continue with the story, and as I've said to you before, I want to remind you as we read this story again together to think of how Peter is feeling. I want you to think about you being in the story with him and how you would feel, what you would see, what you would hear, so that you can feel that you're right there with Peter as he talks about what he's going through in this story. So today, we continue the story, beginning with chapter 5, which is called Hiding, and Peter continues to talk about the place where he's at, and he says, "I was such a bad man now that I didn't deserve for people to like me. They shouldn't even look at me. So at dawn on Friday I went into hiding. But let me tell you something. I still love Jesus. Do you understand this? I wanted to be close to him. So wherever the soldiers took him, I followed, sneaking from hiding place to hiding place like a rabbit, like a robber, like the ugliest person in all the world. The ugliest, yes. A year ago, Jesus had called me by the ugliest name there is. At the time, I thought he was wrong, but now I guessed he was probably right. He had been teaching us the grand plan of his life, that he would go to Jerusalem, that he would suffer many things, and that he would be killed. Killed! Well, from the moment I heard that plan, I hated it, and I told him so. He was still teaching, and after 3 days he was saying, I will rise again, but I wasn't listening. I walked straight up to him and said, God forbid that this should ever happen to you. Jesus snapped his mouth shut. His eyes made sparks of fire, and he said, Get behind me, Satan. If you hate this plan, you hate the ways of God. I came to give my life away for the lives of many people. Satan. Jesus had called me by the ugly name of Satan. How could I let anyone look at me if he was right? That's why I hid myself all Friday long. But I never stopped loving Jesus. And that is why, wherever they took him, I followed. And that's the end of that chapter. Boys and girls, as you think about what Peter has just said, I want you to think about how you would feel if Jesus said that about you, calling you Satan, God's enemy, because of what you said. Let's go on to the next chapter. Chapter 6, at the governor's palace. Friday morning was gray and cold and wet. Even before the city woke up, the priests and soldiers led Jesus to the palace of the Roman governor. Pontius Pilate, the high priest cried, come out and judge this man, this Jesus of Nazareth. He is guilty of crimes deserving death. The governor came out with a sneer on his face. He didn't like us Jews very much. He sat down in a big chair and said, "It's raining. Hurry up and tell me why you think he should die." Well, for one, the high priest said, he tells people not to pay taxes to the emperor. For another, he says that he is a king, Christ the king. Pontius Pilate leaned forward to take the measure of this criminal. He gazed at the thin man with steadfast eyes and raindrops on his hair. The man was shivering in the cold. His face was bruised. His robes cut into his skin, but he looked back at the Roman with no rage nor hate, just patience and a perfect knowing. Pilate said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." Pilate squinted more closely at Jesus. Then he sat back and waved his hand to shoo the priests and the soldiers away. "Go home," he said. "I don't find any fault in the man." The chief priest climbed halfway up the governor's steps and said, "Look harder, sir. He stirs up the citizens. He causes riots against your government." More and more people were gathering now. The high priest turned to them and cried, "You know the evil of Jesus, don't you?" "He's a sly one," the people shouted. "Disloyal." "Right, he breaks the laws of Moses and of Rome." "You see," the high priest said to Pilate, "he's a rebel, a dangerous man." Pilate said to Jesus, "How do you answer these charges?" Jesus stayed silent. Pilate said, "Have you nothing to say for yourself?" Nothing. Jesus stood like a white column, calm and kind. Okay, he said to the chief priests and the crowds. "I know what I'm going to do. I will release one prisoner, and I'll let you choose which one. Should I release the murderer named Barabbas, or shall I release Jesus, the King of the Jews?" It was a trick, and I liked it. Barabbas was wicked. He truly belonged in jail. Surely no one would want him free in the streets. They had to pick Jesus. Pontius Pilate stood up to address the entire crowd. It was amazing how many people had come out in the drizzling rain. "Which man," he called out, "do you choose?" Immediately the people shouted, "Give us Barabbas!" Pilate was shocked. "Then what should I do with Jesus of Nazareth?" he cried. Louder than ever, the huge crowd thundered, "Crucify him!" Why? Why? What evil has he done? The high priest now stood equal to Pilate. By our law he ought to die because he called himself the Son of God. Pilate cried, "Your laws are not my laws. Deal with him yourselves." Then the high priest delivered his final threat. "If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. Anyone who makes himself king is an enemy of the real king, Caesar." Pontius Pilate looked scared. 1,000 people were ready to riot, screaming, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" So the Roman governor sat down and shrugged his shoulders. He released the evil Barabbas. Jesus he ordered to be whipped and then to be crucified. Well, boys and girls, that brings us to the end of chapter 6 as well. And as we think of that chapter, I want you to think of how Peter must have felt when he was there hearing Jesus get interviewed by Pilate, and then having Pilate have the people choose between Barabbas and Jesus, and then having the crowd choose Barabbas to be freed and have Jesus be killed. I wonder how Peter felt about that. I wonder how you would feel about that, having a perfectly good man like Jesus killed instead of a wicked man. So boys and girls, again, grateful that you could hear this story, and want to close my time with you by reminding you again that Jesus loves you, that he's always with you. glad to be with all of you and wish you a blessed rest of your day, and look forward to sharing more of Peter's first Easter the next time we see each other. God bless you all.